I said no editing, so I'm going to create all the edit stuff that I have to do now.
Well, at least it's right at the beginning, so all you have to do is chop it.
Give it like a 2-second block if there's something we want to cut out. Just don't say anything.
Welcome to the Outer Fringe.
Hey guys, I'm Brian, and I'm so glad to have Mike Cowan here today. We're just talking about what a real Renaissance man this gentleman is. He is. You are. You built your own house. You've made a whole career for yourself. You got a wonderful family. We're talking about how educated you are, but self-educated. And versus, going to college and getting a degree. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics today. I think politics might come up. It might be a little bit of a fight, but we were just talking about aliens. Come on, let's start it off, Mike.
Want to start with aliens?
We're going to start with aliens.
I always want to start with aliens.
Yeah, let's make Sarah happy.
That's my favorite topic ever.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, anybody who thinks that we live in a universe as immense as the one we live in and that we're all by ourselves has a small mind. That's really kind of my whole thing on, I'm okay not knowing things that can't be known. I'm completely okay just knowing that there's too much room out there for there not to be something going on besides humanity. How preeminently self-centered to think that we're the whole gig on this little tiny planet, in one of the arms of the Milky Way. It's just insane to think that the rest of the universe is empty. It's just us and all that energy. Trillions and trillions of... think about the energy that every star is putting off. And all the life potential that's out there, and we think we're the only thing. That's just ludicrous. So
it's bananas.
I think that there is life out there. I don't know what it looks like, or if it's been here, or if it's here right now. I heard a thing, interestingly, the other day about, it was just a snippet of somebody saying, the aliens are here, and they've been here for years, and they've infiltrated the government and all this jazz, and who knows? Who cares, right?
Sarah does.
Well... if you want to care about something that's catastrophic to humanity, I'll be honest with you, the two things that I think are most catastrophic to humanity right now are artificial intelligence, which is a real thing. It's not, we're not, they keep pushing the barrier back and saying, well, it'll be artificial intelligence when it takes over the world. But the truth is that there are two corporations in Asia right now who have algorithms, are voting members of their boards of directors. They have total autonomy because they can collect more information and make less emotionally based decisions. They vote on the boards of directors of two large corporations, and they are, that's artificial intelligence. Now, I'm not even, willing to say that that's bad. But I think at a certain point, anything that is super intelligent, and when I say, super intelligence, you read about super bloom of intelligence in AI, looks around and sees, what's the only problem on this planet?
Right.
And, and I don't think it's going to be like Terminator. I think it's just going to, eventually something is going to say, we got to put something in the water so these bastards quit breeding because they're a problem. Well, they're dangerous.
So you said that was one. What was the other thing that you're really worried about?
The other thing that I think is really a huge problem is CRISPR. Do you guys know what CRISPR is?
No.
Okay, so CRISPR is, and this is kind of old technology, and once again, I think that because we're in, we're really just normal folks, right? That we're at a huge distance from real technology. We're only being told stuff way down the line.
Yeah, it's getting filtered too.
Right. CRISPR was discovered in the 80s, but I never read about it until late in the 90s. And now it is the mechanism that your body uses to edit its genome. So when a sperm and an egg join and the blending of DNA, right, is governed by a mechanism that we named CRISPR, and I don't know what the acronym means anymore. I've read it over and over again because I read everything I can find on CRISPR. It's fascinating to me. But they have discovered how to manipulate this process so they can say, and right now they're saying things like, oh, well, sickle cell anemia is caused by this gene, and so we can edit this gene out, and we can save people from having sickle cell anemia or from having, fill in the blank. Breast cancer is a gene that they have identified, and there was just a case in China where a guy is now in a lot of trouble with the Chinese government. He was a genetic scientist, and he, on his own, apparently genetically modified 8 embryos so that they couldn't acquire the AIDS virus because they were the product of unions where AIDS was a factor. And the government found out about it, and it was bad business for him. I don't know what the real fallout is, and obviously we're probably not getting a lot of accurate press out of China, especially on things like that. But
Right.
But I did read that, and I think that, and I wish that I could say, oh, I'm completely opposed to this, but I know that one of my greatest regrets in life is that I didn't have more children. And I know that right now, if I could have a child, and then someone came to me and said, do you want your child to be tall and beautiful and intelligent and healthy, and I had the money to do that I would. If I was Donald Trump,
Ooh.
Thank you, Father, that I'm not Donald Trump. But if I was anybody, if I was somebody wealthy, and I had the ability to do that, I'm afraid that I am not virtuous enough to say, oh no, I'm going to let my kid throw the dice with alcoholism and sickle cell anemia and being 5'7" and all the millions of variables that, and so now there's this way to edit the genome, and every day they sharpen this instrument, and I just like believing that there are aliens in a universe this huge, in a world where there is a Soviet Union and an EU and a United States and a China and an India. These are all enormous, powerful countries, right?
Right.
The United States has something like a $57 billion a year black budget. It's a budget that's so
Oh my God, yeah.
that's so dark that the service or the Senate Armed Services Committee don't know what it's being spent on. They're on a need to know basis, and they don't know.
It's more than that, because there's also money that they don't track that's outside of that as well. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Not even just there yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're the only government that's doing that. I don't think
Absolutely
that the
not.
United States, everybody's like, oh, well, we're the devil. Well, we're not. We're just living in we're living in a world where people are responding to the stimulus, and someone in the government is like, well, anyway, let's stay on point for just a minute. So all of these countries all have enormous tax incomes, and they are all spending money to protect themselves from one another because we're afraid, right? Mm-hmm. We're afraid of them, and I'm sure that they're afraid of us, and they're spending money on things like CRISPR and AI.
Yeah.
And I think that those two things, I think that within a century there will either be something will happen that will pair us off the planet. They'll either put something in the water and say, human beings as we are now, we're terrible. I mean, we're like, the Matrix said it, we're like a virus. We take everything, we abuse everything. I wish that we weren't. I love humans.
I gotta jump in on that, Mike, because I don't think the we that you're saying is the real we of humanity. What the we is like, yes, humans as a whole, but really that's led a lot by
The powerful.
say the powerful, the politicos, the 1%, the 3%, the corporations, because like scarcity that
But
we
the
talked
mechanics are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The mechanics are. I agree that there are good people everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
But the mechanics of humanity is that do you know that there are 1 million species that are in danger of extinction right now for the first time in history.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally know that.
Yeah.
And
Not to mention the
so
rainforest.
that's and that's all about human intervention in the environment.
Okay, so is it because we're throwing away plastic bottles? Now, who sells us plastic bottles? They don't sell us water. They sell us plastic bottles like Nestle. Who set up the system where we are now?
What does blame do for us, though?
I'm talking about let's get at the root of the problem. Instead of blaming 100% of the population, is there a system that we can change that we've been put into, like cars instead of light rail, right? Mm-hmm. Would we have as much of an energy oil scarcity if we moved to a different system? Now, that system was set up by lobbyists in like the 40s and 50s in city building and town planning to have everything be far away. You couldn't have small villages. And so humanity as a whole, I mean, I'd say like in Europe, right? There's small little villages. They walk because that's how it was set up a long time ago, right? So it's the system that we are given. And so if we can actually look at the problem, I don't think the problem is humanity as a whole. I think a lot of these problems are systems that we currently have to exist in, and if we change the systems, we as a whole could really make great change. That's kind of where I'm trying to jump in.
And I want to jump in really quick and say I think a lot of what is happening because of this system as a whole is it's instilling so much fear in humanity.
Yeah.
And when people respond in fear, they're kind of going to create more chaos, and that's kind of what's happening on our planet. Is we're all stuck in this cycle and we don't really know how to fix it. So then there's more fear and more pushback, but there's really no solution. That's the problem. Is like you can't really go up against these giant companies because we have no power, and then when you feel powerless on top of it, it's even worse.
That's true, but isn't that what they benefit from? If you have a single corporation that has a non-unionized workforce, and it's like, oh, I've got all the power, I'm going to feed them starvation wages, and pay my corporate CEOs $300,000 or $300 million every year, and we're going to keep increasing that wage gap until people are just so afraid that they can't even stop working because they're not going to have enough money to make rent next month and eat and put gas in their car, right? So then you have this situation where the people don't realize that they actually have the power as a whole, and so they collectively feel powerless because you make them feel individualized.
But to have the power as a whole, everybody would need to be on in that same mindset.
Yeah, we'd have to be connected and recognize.
We'd have to be connected, and and they're creating division.
Yes.
You watch the news, you watch anything on politics. It's all about creating division. It's pushing people away from each other. It's building less connection, and the more we're disconnected, the more we feel alone in this. The more we feel powerless. The more we feel fearful. I think it's just kind of a vicious cycle. And what you can change is like, if you really want to make an impact on the planet, you could stop driving your car. You could, stop, giving any money to these systems that are destroying the planet. But then what do you then you're just creating suffering within yourself. And then,
right.
I don't know.
Are you gonna go dig a hole and live in a cave?
Just go rogue. Yeah. You
know what I mean? It's like, if you want to stay in the boat now, and I know that you guys were kind of off politics, but if you want to do something substantive to change our system, we live in the United States. This is our system. If I was king for a day and I could do one thing, is I would eliminate money from the election process.
Oh, God, yeah.
Socialize the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Call lobbying bribery what it is and actually make it illegal.
Right. Just completely do away with...
Oh, my God.
You could socialize the whole thing and make it I've thought so much about, if you could just make it like a holiday, like 1 week in every 5 years, you start at the local level and you do all the elections up through the national level. Anybody who wants to be in the election gets a background check, right? So you're a square shooter. You're not some clown. You know what I mean? The FBI looks into your background, and if you get passed by them, then you're not a monster, right? And then everybody, goes to the band shell in their town, and the guy who wants to be president says, "Hey, I want to be president," and you just work up the line, and at the end of the week, or at the end of, maybe do it one day a week for 4 weeks or something like that every 5 years, and then everybody gets elected and serves. Now, I just think that because the system cannot be changed as long as money drives the system. Money is going to do what money is doing, and it's not money's fault, and it's not humanity's fault. People are on a leash. Before you can get to city council, someone's got a leash on you under our current system. It's not the councilman's fault. It's not the governor's fault. It's not the president's fault. As much as I'd like to blame the world on our current leader. But, the system is designed so that someone has a leash on all of them. Someone with money. Someone with, right? And if you want to get away from a really, velociraptor capitalist consumer-driven economy like what we have, then you're going to have to start by eliminating money from the election process. It's the one thing that would allow people to go in with a completely, with no leash on them and say, hey, I want to enfranchise every single human being in the United States. Every felon, every person who's addicted, every person who is living in the street, I want to find a way to bring them into humanity so that they can produce and be happy. And when I say produce, I don't mean consume. I mean maybe write poetry, maybe think, maybe do art, but be a part of something substantive and decent. But you can't do that right now because none of us have the money to do it. And oh my God, I mean, it is such a fear-driven, money-controlled system that if you're ever going to make the kind of changes, I mean, like I said, you could go live in a hole if you want.
Yeah.
You can dig a hole and pull plywood over. I know people who've done that.
Yeah.
And I think that's spiritually unfit. You know what I mean? And I wish that I was as good as I would like to be, but I live in this world. I drive a Jeep, for instance, which I have a lot of guilt about. You know what I mean? I drive this Jeep. It gets 15 miles to the gallon. It costs a lot of money. I have a lot of money tied up in a vehicle. And it's like, gosh, if I was really wise, what I would do is buy a 1980 diesel Volkswagen Rabbit and get 50 miles to the gallon and, all of those things that I would live in a smaller home than I do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I built my home, but it's not huge, but it's bigger than I need.
It's a beautiful home.
It's a nice home. I love it. You know what I mean?
You did a great job.
Thank you. But if you're going to change our system, you have to be willing to talk politics. And the only way it's ever going to change is if you get money out of it.
Yeah. And how do you even do that though? Like that's the thing. It's
it would take a catastrophe right now.
Yeah.
When I remember when I was in high school.
Maybe we need that.
Well, I won't argue against that. I mean, I'm not so when I was in high school, my economics teacher said, listen, Mike, they're too smart to let you get hungry. And as much as we're sitting in this room and we're four kind of semi-malcontents, right, talking to the world, and we're not idiots, but, we're not rocket scientists. The idea is that, do you know that we're all better off than our grandparents were, almost for sure? We have more food. We have our shelter is nicer. Our vehicles are more reliable.
Yes.
All of those things, and there's a reason for that, and that's because they do not, the people who do have the money, and obviously that's a very small percentage of the population, have a huge amount of control over the financial system, right? Those people don't want us to be hungry. And, part of me says that, they're doing a better job. It's a dangerous thing, real freedom. Like what I talked about, let's eliminate money from the election process. So you got 500 people in Washington off the leash. You got 435 Congress people and 100 senators and a president and whoever, the judiciary, and nobody's on a leash. And so everybody, what happened when they voted for Brexit? The most Googled question as soon as Brexit passed was in England was, what's Brexit?
Yeah.
I mean, so now they have Brexit happening, and what they got is a tiger by the tail. I mean, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it'll tank the whole world economy because people had the freedom. Now, that was a real referendum. Now, it was driven and manipulated by, everybody knows about the campaigns that were run on Facebook. You know, there was a political manipulation that happened there because people who wanted Brexit hired a company that really kind of pushed that agenda, and without money, they got enough of the population to vote for Brexit. Now, I'm not well educated enough to know what the real fallout of that's going to be, but that's what happens when people are not, that was, the people in England voted. That was a majority vote for Brexit. And, they were, you can say that they were manipulated, and maybe they were terribly manipulated. But what I'm saying is it's a dangerous thing. We all think that we could do a better job, but the business of being in this world and running the United States is dangerous and complicated, and there's a lot at stake. And as much as I'd like to say off with their heads, we're all better off than our grandparents were. We all live in warmer homes, we all live in cooler homes, we all drive nicer vehicles, we all make more money.
Well,
and I hate to be that voice of moderation, but
okay,
am I nuts? Is that
there's a couple of things just to temper,
sure,
maybe that thought, because medical technology has grown over the years, sure, right? Education probably better than the grade school primers that we used to use in the 50s, but there was also this American dream, and there was a single earner that could own a home and provide for a couple kids, right? You can have your own little white picket fence, right? And there was savings. There was an increase in savings, and kids could go to college, right? I heard somebody talking about like, women entering the workforce and everything. I'm like, okay, but I think gender equality is great, but I think what really happened was you needed a 2-income household to even get by, and so we saw like a increase in women into the workforce as well.
Haven't you ever heard that? I'm almost sure it was Rockefeller, and don't quote me, said in an interview in like 1962, I financed the equal rights movement because I wanted their taxes. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? He wanted women in the workforce so he could tax them. Now, I'm not saying that women in the workforce is a bad thing.
Right.
I'm just saying that at the end of the day, I think that the dream of a 1-income family and a white picket fence is a dream in your mind, and maybe in my mind too. I would love it if I could make enough money and have the financial, but maybe, my wife is an educated woman who works hard and makes more money than I do, and I make good money. And I don't think that maybe being stuck in the house is her dream. And maybe it's not Sarah's dream either, right? She's an independent, intelligent, self-governing, autonomous human being. And in the 1950s, women were vulnerable. And so I once again, I don't want to, I don't want to be nasty, but I don't know if.
Okay. But
right?
is there now a pride attached to, well, there's scarcity. There's need for more money. We can't save money with a single income anymore. Mm-hmm. There's a wage gap that's ever increasing. The savings are gone. Now we're just getting more and more into debt. So is then there a pride also? Like, I think it's great if your spouse, you both have the ability to, if one isn't raising kids, sometimes that's maybe an option that people do. They take raising the kids instead of a career option, right? And so if you can go both and have careers, great. But is there a pride now that it's like we both have to work in order to even survive? And I don't think that we should have a pride attached to that. I think we should recognize that there is a scarcity that we're being fed. And so when we say that everything is better than it was for our grandparents, in some ways, we're still being pushed towards indentured servitude when even 2 incomes isn't going to be enough, or 2 incomes isn't going to get your kids into college, or 2 incomes isn't going to get you a house, right? Or any one of those, or 2 incomes right now doesn't put enough food on the table.
Well, and I think also, you know, when as soon as we're like graduated from high school, we've got, you know, people sending us offers for credit card approvals, and we all of a sudden have access to borrowed money. And that's a thing, you know, so it's not only like, I think the consumerism too with our generation is also, it's just, we want more. We want to have like, you know, nice stuff. We want to have the fancy, you know, car. We want the college education.
The newest iPhone. So then all of a sudden there's this whole idea when you get out of high school and you get into college and you're like, okay, I can borrow all this money and then at some point I'll pay it back. But then what happens is you start living off credit cards. And a young person who is irresponsible with a credit card, like, was that a thing back in the 50s? I don't really think it was, you know. And, you know, people like to shop, and then you start kind of going on this spree and like racking up all this debt. And then on top of it, you have student loans, and then you get out of college and you're just like massively in debt. So how do you dig yourself out at that point? And that's where I think they're so like always just eager to borrow us or loan us fake money. Like everybody's kind of living in this society where we're just like constantly spending money. They want to own you. You've got a social security number. They can find you for the rest of your life. They want to own you and the interest. And
then you're sucked right into that system. And how do you get out?
Right, but we have to be responsible for ourselves.
Right.
I mean, agreed that, I mean, if you want to read something interesting about the money system, have you ever read the book? There's a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island.
No.
Which talks about the Federal Reserve System and how it's, you know, not part of the government. It's privately held. And how our money system was changed at the turn of the century, of the last century, of, you know, the 1900s, from a gold-based system. So there was only, you know, as much money as there was gold to back it.
Right.
And now what we have is a
non-fiat system.
Right, it's fiat, exactly, fiat system. And so I won't argue any of that, or that living in debt is not a bad thing. I mean, that's one thing I really have, you know, endeavored, not completely successfully, but I'm grateful for where I am financially, and not because of the amount of money I make, although, you know, me and my wife make enough money so that we have been able to largely avoid the credit trap, at least to a degree that it has not been painful. We borrow money, we have good credit, but we're low debt, right? I don't know if you can, you know, when you talk about changing the system, the only way that the system is going to change is if you get enough people who are unhappy that they're willing to go out into the streets and start making trouble for the system. Because the system, you know, it's like, if you don't say nothing, it's going to keep right on doing what it's doing. And as long as we're fed and housed and clothed
and Netflixed.
And Netflix, agreed. I mean, media is freaky. We were raised with this idea of a free press, and how, and I don't trust anything I read anymore. It's not that, and I don't think it's so much a conspiracy theory as it's just, you know, almost, you know, a white storm of, there's so much media that you can't even sift through what's important, what's real, what's valuable, and what's just brain candy. You know what I mean? But the only way you're going to change the system is if you get enough people unhappy. Like, so in 2008, right, when there was, what was the I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it now, that all the places got together.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy.
Well, that was right
Yeah.
after the mortgage crisis.
Yeah.
08 or 09, right? Occupy. Now, I worked through that entire time, by the grace of God. I worked that entire time, but I remember being very conscious of the fact that Occupy was going on and that there were people who were actually making enough noise that they were being heard. Now, maybe they weren't being listened to, but they were being heard. But the fallout was, at the end of the day, they didn't know what they wanted, and so they didn't get anything.
They were just mad and angry
All that energy that was spent, and people probably with good motive and decent people like us, people as smart as we are, people decent and caring about their country, and what they got was a bunch of nothing because
and $1 trillion bailouts that could have gone to education and actually increased our workforce.
How is that even effective, really, though? Like going and, I mean, I love the idea of it. But
that was the system that they didn't change. Yeah. They aren't responsible for that. What happened? That, $1 trillion bailout, which was a crime of proportions, I mean.
I think we saw at least $4 trillion in bailouts to different, like, large companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was huge.
Insane. Too big to fail, right?
Yeah.
But the only way that you're going to, so let's suppose that didn't happen. Let's suppose that we'd let Ford and General Motors, or Ford and Chrysler, was it Ford and Chrysler that took the big bailouts?
Mm-hmm.
And all the banks that went Sherman Leeson and AIG, and we let them all go. Just now you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And all the people, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that were, now you're all unemployed. And all of their mortgages go. And, you're talking about 1929 on steroids. I'd be living in the streets. Everything would have gone down. So, it's easy to sit in a room and talk a bunch of smack about a situation that I'm not happy about. I'm not saying that it was good, but what do you do?
Well,
because in 1929, Hoover said, do we swear?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hoover said, fuck them, right? And he let it all go, and it was, World War II is what got us out of the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. So is that what you want? Do you want people to get so fucking hungry that they say, hey, let's go take what Mexico has? Or, you know what I mean? I think that, once again, I don't like what happened. And I wish that we lived in a system that was more individually representative. But I think you have to really look at the truth about, what, if you let all those people, we'd all be in the toilet right now. If they had let all of the companies that were in default go, and then all of those people were unemployed and their mortgages went toxic, and what else would have happened? I mean, it might not even be the United States anymore, because what happened tanked the whole world. And if we had really let it go and we hadn't dumped all that money, maybe Russia would have just said, hey, why don't we just go and take it? Because they don't have food right now. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that would have happened, and I'm not preaching fear. I'm simply saying that if you're standing if you are the 1% and you're in Washington and you figure out that these clowns have created a bubble, and we know that Bush Jr. Was instrumental in the bubble, but somebody got left holding the book, you know what I mean, and was like, wow, now the whole thing is either going to go down the tubes, or we're going to throw money at it until we're going to bail until we keep the boat out of the water. And I don't know if I got nuts big enough to just say, hey, fuck it, let's let the whole thing go down the tubes. I mean, I'd like to say they were wrong. I mean, what was wrong was that they let the bubble create itself. Once, when Sherman Lehman said, we're going default, it was too late. That ship had sailed, and the only thing I think that could be done at that point was to do what they did. I think that what was done was, I gotta say, was fucking masterful. What should have been done differently was that the bubble should not have been, you shouldn't allow a stripper in Miami Beach to claim that she's making $600,000 a year and buy 5 places.
Sure, the ninja loans.
Right. They created a lending environment where any clown could walk into a place and say, I'm making big money and buy 3 homes. And they overvalued real estate. They taxed, the lending was like, there was so much credit out and so many bad mortgages in AIG that at a certain point, as soon as one little thing happened, it drug that insured mortgage system down to the point where it tipped over, right? That is what should have been modified before it happened. Once it happened, I think what they did was brilliant, man. And I don't mean that, man, I think W is a war criminal, and that's the nicest thing I've got to say about him. The worst president in American history. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, a monster, a puppet. The list of things that, but once Sherman said we're going Tanko, and AIG followed 2 days later or 3 days later. Once that happened, you couldn't do anything but try and save it, because if they had let it go, we'd all be sitting on a street corner someplace with a can in our hands.
I don't know if that. I think that's true. Okay, so let me step it back a bit, Mike. Okay. So, a corporation, let's just say a small street cafe, right? They make you a sandwich, they make you a coffee, you give them money, which is a store of goods and services. It's no longer based on gold, but they can turn around. It's backed by the we trust in the federal government and the Federal Reserve. It will probably lose some value in the day or two until you turn it into your bank and then pay your bills with it. But that's inflation, right? Okay, so you said you have a corporation, a small corporation that maybe has a morality to it, right? And then you have maybe a corporation like Nike, and they pay kids in far off countries 25 cents a day to make sneakers that they turn around and sell for $80 to $100, $120 in America. And you're like, well, we really like their shoes, but there's not much morality. And you start saying, well, 25 cents a day is more than these kids, if a kid should be working for 12 hours a day, would have made anywhere else. And so we start making allowances on the morality of corporations and how people make their money, like Nike, from something like that. And so then I'm just going to skip over Wall Street as a whole and go straight to the derivatives market. So the derivatives market is, I'm going to bet that tomorrow the stock will go up. You're going to bet that tomorrow the stock will go down, and one of us is going to lose. One of us is going to make money. And just like a bank, somebody who's making this derivative is really just going to make a small interest percent, whether you win or you win, right? And so we have this, gambling system, right? So we're just allowing people to gamble with stocks, and even based on the derivatives market, somebody's always going to lose, right? So
sure.
I'm going to step back to Wall Street for 1 second here and say, it was started because companies wanted to raise initial capital by stock offerings. They wanted to grow. Sure. They said, I'm gonna offer a part of my company, and you're gonna buy it thinking that it's a growth asset, and because of that, your wealth will increase against the inflation of the dollar. Right.
Yes.
So for every day you own this, it's going to hopefully grow longer.
Right.
And if you don't think so, you can sell it, and the value goes up and down. Right. So that's not a immoral kind of business job that Wall Street started. They said, we're going to help people buy and sell and be that financial instrument for that. Right. But then when you have this section of Wall Street that is no longer working for people's well-being, and they're saying, we see these little things where we know that we can destroy everyone's wealth in this country, but we're going to make off with billions. And then when we tank these big companies that we're working for, because it's going to affect everyone, and sooner or later it all catches up in the asset industry, then we're going to have the government bail us out for trillions. And you say,
so
is
do you
this
think it was engineered?
No, what I'm saying is it's capitalism to an immoral length. And if I paid you to go beat a kid, that's capitalism, but it's immoral and it's illegal.
Sure.
And if I paid you to go kill someone, Sarah, because you would, right? And that would be capitalism, but it's immoral and it's illegal, right? And so at some point, do we say, you know what, this form of capitalism is, and that's why I walked you through all that.
We have an
this
SEC.
is immoral, but the SEC doesn't do shit.
I know that they don't, but I know that they don't, and we know that every time somebody gets put in a certain position that they get hired by, you know what I mean? I know the mechanics of, but once again, until you remove money from the election process, someone with money
I agree with you there. I agree with you.
Everything kind of in my mind goes back to the fact that our government has to be separated from financial gain if they're going to make detached decisions about the economy and the systems that we have engineered to create prosperity and security for the population. I mean, I don't know, because as long as someone has a motive, a financial motive, and all of those men and women have financial motive, they're all on a financial leash, they're going to make allowances for the things that keep them in office and that protect their agendas.
Because
because they're human beings.
The military industrial complex is a higher level in this country than the government.
Yeah.
The government doesn't control the military industrial complex. The military industrial complex controls the government. Corporations control the government through lobbying. So I totally agree with you. All that money means that the government has less power than the people who hold the money. Apple, Google, Facebook, Walmart paying zero taxes, but lobbying the government, so they are in control.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the whole military industrial complex, as much as I'm just more ignorant about. I understand that it drives our economy, but I'm not educated enough about the real mechanics of that to blame it more than I would blame Walmart or Apple or Amazon or.
Well, you talked about the 57 billion black budget, right? And that's one. So Rumsfeld, right, way back when, on September 10th, talked about how the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, was missing 2.3 trillion, and the next day got a missile in his office.
That I did not know.
I mean, there's at least one picture with no plane parts. There's a hole that wasn't big enough for a plane.
Oh, I mean, we know that. I mean, I know for sure, just like I know that there's aliens somewhere in the universe. Mm-hmm. I know for sure that what happened on 9/11 isn't what we were told. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what happened, but I would bet my life this instant without doubt that what we were told is not, and the, you know, not to change the subject, but man, you know, Building 7 is really
another one. Yeah.
Right. You can't explain Building 7.
Yeah, at all.
Nobody's like a kitchen.
Well, you can explain it with a bomb. You can explain it with like a detonated bomb.
You can't explain what they said happened in Building 7 mm-hmm. as a kitchen fire knocked down a 34-story building. Right. And people believe that. And it's like, you know, I was raised, you know, in a country, and I want to be an American. You know what I mean? I want to be patriotic. I want to support the government. But when someone says to me, you know, I spent my whole life building things. I've been in buildings that size. A kitchen fire doesn't knock that building down.
No.
No goddamn way. Not in this world, not in this universe. That doesn't happen. That's not what happened. I don't know what happened. I'm not willing to say, oh, it was Simtex or it was the government or who the fuck knows. But something happened that isn't what we got told, because it wasn't a kitchen fire. And, we'll probably never know, just like we'll never really know what happened to Kennedy. As tragically,
he went against the Fed and he got shot.
Well, there's a lot of,
I won't know the details.
I know, right, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
A 911 looks a lot like, Bush needed a war to buoy the economy, and not Rumsfeld, but Cheney made 911 happen.
And Cheney wrote the Patriot Act over a decade before the bunch of people, and they shelved it.
He got rich on TVR during the war. Got rich or whatever. You know what I mean? But we don't know that, and we probably will never be able to prove any of that. But if you follow the money, that looks like a logical path. Can we? There's something I don't want to forget to talk about.
Yeah.
So you talked about, one income and a family where one member can stay home and raise children, and
maybe it's the dad.
And like I said earlier, I wish that I had more kids, and I have a son who I love with all my heart and is amazing and brilliant, and I don't know how that happened, and I just am amazed by this kid, but he's my only one, and I wish that I could have had more, and I didn't have more for all the reasons that you detailed pretty clearly, that I have a morbid fear of not being able to care for I had a morbid fear of not being able to care for my children. I was always, in the depths of a lifestyle that was very messy. I lived a very messy lifestyle. And in the depths of that lifestyle, I was very careful about birth control because I had a pathological fear of bringing children into the world that I couldn't care for.
You.
Well, because of the way I was brought up. Mm-hmm. And
where is that today? We'll get back to that. I'll let you go.
That being said, I think one of the really hopeful things, and I don't even know if it's hopeful, but there's this thing that, that the population of the first world is in decline.
Right.
And the reason that the population of the first world is in decline is because of all of the reasons that you detailed and the things I just talked about. People are afraid that if they have 2 children, then they won't be able to buy G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip or whatever it is that a Jeep Rubicon or a house with 3 bedrooms instead of 2, or on a quarter of an acre instead of a third of an acre. Fill in the blank. We're making a value judgment based on what can we care for and what can we have.
Not to mention, what kind of world are we bringing our children? Like, what kind of world is this? And do I want to bring a child into this world?
Well, once again, I'm going to fall back on people are warmer, better fed, mm-hmm. better housed. We're all better off. Most of us, there are fewer people starving than when there were, at the turn of the 20th century, New York City was twice as populated as it is now, or half again anyway. It was the biggest city on earth.
Right.
And people lived in squalor that I don't imagine that we can even guess at. And they were still breeding and bringing children into this world. And so there's just a part of me that says, there might be some wisdom in the idea of we don't. The system has created a world because what we need is a lot fewer human beings on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that comes to mind too when you say that, yeah, we're better fed. We have the comforts, but it's at the expense of our planet. I mean, if you look at things on a global scale, as far as what's going on with climate change and what's going on with our planet and how it's suffering, and in order to keep continuing this cycle of life, we need to make some changes because, the way that we're mass consuming and the way that we're just kind of destructively, you know, like factory farming, and you know, the way that we're doing like the deforestation to build these palm tree forests so that we can have this palm oil to make processed shit, and like the way that we're destroying the planet in order to feed everyone is a huge problem. And
if we can drag everybody into the first world and the population does decline, I mean, I don't know a better way to, you know, people in the third world are the reason that there are 6 billion of us is because of and I'm not blaming the third world. I'm just saying that people who are not educated, who don't have anything else to provide them ease and comfort, you know, I think humans have a built-in need for a certain amount of ease and comfort. And if they don't have enough security and enough resource, which I'm not arguing in favor of, I'm just simply saying that, you know, there's a quotient that exists, and what people do when they're in Nicaragua is they go buy a hooker for $5 and they get her pregnant, and she has another baby.
Yeah, and it'll cure their AIDS.
Right.
Oh God. No, that's I think a different continent. But
Well,
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
That's a subject.
That's
Anyway,
an Africa.
we can bring that back.
That's in
around.
Africa.
Do you mind if I pick up on this for a sec, Mike?
well, I'd really like to
going?
just finish
Yeah,
my
go
thought.
for it. I didn't know where you're going.
Overpopulation is this thing we're talking about, and the thing that has combated overpopulation more than any other thing in human experience is the first world. That's the truth. That's the numbers tell us that, and I just want to put that out there. That's my only point. So now I'm done.
Okay, because I am picking up that point, and I got, you know, normally I take like a note or two during one of these podcasts, and like I got a fucking flow chart in front of me. Okay, like it is just
We're gonna have a PowerPoint
like
presentation.
yeah, this is like
Brian's.
yeah. So getting back to education, right now, you see. Getting the money out of politics, and I back you on this one, right? But what I also see is nowhere near enough spending in this country on education, right? Now, also we're reducing money on sex education. We're making it illegal to talk about sex education. We're defunding places where you can get birth control and all this, right? And so what I see is a whole lot of people. Now, when did you have your son? How old are you?
I am 51. I'll be 52 in a couple months.
How old were you when you had your son?
Boy, that's a good question. Well, he's 24 years of age.
Okay.
So he was born in 95. I think I was 27.
Okay, so I was about to like include you in this group of like, I see a lot of people having kids under 25. I was just going to throw that out there, right?
And I'm very grateful that I waited.
Yeah. Waited till 27. See, the culture that I came from, it was like, no, go to school, right? Finish college, then get your career set, then get a house. And then once you're set, you know, like as a responsible adult having, a place of your own, like my parents waited a long time to have me so that they had a house first, right? This is the family, this is the culture that I've and like I see it's literally, I'm just gonna say babies having babies, and I see irresponsible people that don't have a life path, don't have a career, don't have those things that we just talked about, not only education but also a fear of not being able to provide, just have kids, right? And if you want to get into it, those children then have children who do the same thing. Let's get pregnant between 16 and 22 and just throw it out there. And so when you're talking about like a decrease in population of the first world, there's still a large section of the first world that is maybe having kids too young. And I know when I get into talking about this stuff, it's like, oh, it's almost like bordering on eugenics. Like, are you old enough? Do you have enough responsibility? Do you have enough money? Are you freaking smart enough to have this kid? You can't have any of those regulations on having children. And
Let's talk about eugenics.
I understand that. Well, that's CRISPR.
Right.
Right. Instead of breeding the Aryan guy, you're just going to eliminate every other gene
I'm still
for it.
curious
It's the same
as
deal.
to why the CRISPR thing, like why you said that is something you're fearful of.
Because
What is it?
if
What
you
is-
start messing around with genetics,
Yeah.
what is going to be... So, anthropology is something I'm fascinated by, and I love studying, like, ancient man, like, from...
Got to read the book Sapiens. It's great.
I have read the book.
Okay, yeah, I'm reading it right now.
I'm fascinated by anthropology, and so if you study, like, we're like Homo habilis, and if you start screwing around with CRISPR long enough, what do you do when the people who have 3%, the 3% who have 97% of the money, or however the mechanics of that work now, it's changing all the time. There's a small group that has a lot of money, and those people, I guarantee you, have access to CRISPR.
Yeah.
Okay? And what happens when all of a sudden they are smarter and better looking?
Okay.
And they aren't Homo sapiens anymore.
So it's almost kind of like a hybrid.
But I don't care, because at some point it's like, okay, when I was learning about code,
Homo habilis didn't care either.
When I was
Do you
learning
know that there were 26? We know that at one point when Homo sapiens lived on the planet, there were 26 other Homo
Groups.
Exactly.
Homo groups.
I didn't know that there was 26, but I
Yeah.
know
Well,
that
what I read, and obviously I'm not an anthropologist, what I read was that there was at least 26 other groups that were what? Anybody exterminated
Yeah.
by Homo sapiens.
Homo sapiens, as we know it, has some of the genetic diversity from those other groups. They definitely interbred. And what I know from writing source code, Mike, okay, is that there is code that is deeply embedded into any program that if you look at the surface, you don't know why it's there. But it's because of
And
something.
if you start screwing around with it,
Yeah.
then it comes unraveled.
And so what's
and
gonna
I think
happen-
that's a concern. But do you think that the people who create or who discovered the mechanics of CRISPR don't know that, and that they're not?
I fucking absolutely believe that. We talked about how the Dutch stand on the shoulders of other scientific giants, and they say in order to defeat the flu, right, because the flu, kills old people and kills children, we need to create the super flu, right? And so they have a flu in a lab since 2012, and was it 2002? Jesus, it's been a while. That will kill, if it gets out of the lab, single human lab mistake, half of the people on this planet. Half of the people on this planet will kill.
Good start.
Right. Yeah. Okay. No,
I'm not really afraid of Captain Trips. I mean, I don't think we've done such a great job that we need to be in love with ourselves.
But what I do know is that we don't know everything, right? And I do know that at some point, if you make a kid that is smarter and more attractive, and you give him all the wealth in the world because of his fucking parents, right? That bloodline isn't going to last forever. At some point, they're going to overstep their bounds.
Well,
and they're going to fuck it up.
Homo sapien has lasted as long as this lasted, a long time. And we exterminated the other 26 groups. Not that we didn't interbreed, but the truth is that we scrubbed basically the text of those other human. And what I'm saying is, I think that the reason I'm concerned about that is that I think there will be a divergence.
So it's like it almost like
there
will
need to be a Genghis Khan, one of those CRISPR babies that goes out and fucks a quarter of the world and has babies with them. Like
okay,
to get that kind of change across the world in 1,000 generations.
I don't think so.
Okay.
What if there are 10,000 children born in the world this year who have a 250 IQ?
I wish. Their bloodline might die off, but they might solve the world's problems. They might be like, oh, our parents, we should kill them. We should kill all the 1%. We should take out all the government and replace them with some sort of benevolent.
Smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying that, and I'll just shut up about that subject for right now. I
Okay.
would love to talk about medicine for a few minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I got a note about medicine on my thing. Oh wait, we were on education, and I wanted to talk about education.
I
Can we
was.
backstrap long enough to. So about education, and not necessarily about the quality of education, because obviously public education is a mechanism that prepares us to work and consume, right? We know that a lot of what public education is a system that gets us up in the morning, gets us going to work, right? Gets us doing what we're told, and prepares us to live in society. It doesn't have as much to do with the flowering mind as we would like to believe. It has more to do with training us to be workers and members of society.
Right.
But, man, I believe with all my heart that we need to, and even if it's not a great system, that we need to educate everybody who wants an education to the limit of what they're willing to learn.
Okay, so shout out to the millions of teachers who, even though the federal and state governments are propagating that idea that, the teachers are just wardens of each little jail cell as they, turn their kids into factory workers, because those teachers are still trying to educate and inspire on, a barely survivable wage. Now classes of 35 at least, every day.
Right. I'm not down on teachers at
Yeah.
all. I think every person in this country should be educated as much as, and I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't room in the system for improvement as far as quality of education. What I'm saying is that we need more education for everybody. I think the education system that we live in currently, my son Oliver is in the military and is going now, is in a master's program, and because of his intellectual horsepower, has been able to get a free ride, basically. But if you don't have that blessing, then I know, in fact, a guy who's a doctor, and he went to the University of Washington, and he still has student debt. And he's been a doctor for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And so he's, at the top of the food chain kind of in a lot of ways, as far as, he makes good money. It's what prestige is the highest for doctors, right? That's what the thing tells us, that, it's a prestigious job. He's well paid, and he still has student debt. And I think that, we need to get away from one other thing that I think that should be socialized. And man, I hate to be a socialist, but I really kind of believe that education, I don't think that you can, I think that by giving education to people, you create a world that is better.
100%
irrevocably. That
So do you think that's partly why the drug companies are able to influence doctors so much? Like, because if you prescribe like certain drugs, you get kickbacks at the end of the year, and you make more money if you like push more like a certain type of drug.
Okay.
Do you think that's part of it? Because I don't know where I'm going with this exactly, but like if a doctor gets a job and he starts practicing medicine, and all of a sudden he's like, well, if you start prescribing this drug more, you'll get these kickbacks at the end of the year. And he's like, well, I got to pay off this debt, so maybe I'll just start prescribing this drug.
Well, surely it's a driver.
Yeah.
I know that doctors, I think,
take the lobbying out of medicine.
Right. And I know the doctor, in fact, that I'm talking about won't allow prescription companies in his office.
That's good.
But I'm sure that there are people who have the kind of pressures that you're talking about that affect their decision making.
And that's probably why he's still paying it off. Because he's not allowing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong. But I just feel like they're
right.
I think that it's a real issue.
Yeah.
That
I do too.
Well, turn on your television set and it's like an ad for.
Yeah. Freaks me out.
Do you feel like this? Go see your doctor and ask him about
cause
this.
paralysis or death.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other thing is that we're a drugged nation. I mean, it's scary the amount of psychoactive drugs that are being, let alone, if you have something like diabetes or some issue, high blood pressure, fill in the blank, that even, like I eat too much red meat. My blood pressure isn't as good as I'd like it to be. And I do yoga 4 days a week. I try to take care of myself, but it's in my genes. You know what I mean? I'm probably going to die of a stroke someday. That's what killed my grandfather. It's what killed an aunt of mine.
Or you could just stop eating so much red meat, but that's...
I could. And
that'd be
maybe
simple
I will.
God forbid you have diabetes in this country as
I'm
they
trying to
increase
be
the price of
transparent
insulin.
over here. I'm trying to be transparent.
I know. No, but it's...
But
It's
what
an
I'm
issue,
talking
yeah.
about is not issues of medicine. People have diabetes. People have high blood pressure. People,
Right.
Those are physical things. What I'm talking about is people going to the doctor and saying, I feel bad. And the doctor saying, well, here, take this. And how much of that is going on? It is, man, I don't know. It's a little, it's just a little freaky, the amount of
they'll give you
psychoactive
anything.
drugs
Yeah.
that are being, now they won't give you painkillers anymore, which I don't want painkillers, but I think it's very interesting now with the whole opium crisis. Now, if you have, I had double knee replacement. I had double knee replacement when I was 47. I had both of my knees replaced. And I don't use any kind of mind-altering chemicals. But I know that when they cut the 6 biggest bones in your body and pound hardware into them, that you're going to have to take, right, and it's painful, right? Painful on an order of magnitude that is real. And so they said, this is what you take, and I took what they told me to take, and I was very grateful that it was available to me.
Right.
Now they don't want to give anybody regular amount of pain medicine for things like that, but they're giving people Adderall, and they're giving them Prozac, and they're giving them Xanax, and all of these psychoactive drugs so that people don't have to feel life, which is another reason that most of us aren't ever going to get active and get in the streets because we have Netflix and Xanax.
Everything numbing us. Yeah.
Oh yeah, bread and circus, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Now wait, so you made a connection that I was about to make. Okay, so the level of OxyContin that Purdue Pharma makes, right, for this country and gets overprescribed. There's legal poppy that they can get from Australia that 3 different companies can get. There's legal poppy that they can get from Turkey, because I don't think people get it. They're like, oh, it's synthetic heroin. I'm like, well, you still, it's like making sugar. You need the base product. You need the poppy, you need the heroin to make the synthetic heroin. They just, do a chemical process to it and make it into pill form. So then where do you get all this extra poppy? Well, we have all these U.S. military soldiers protecting ever-growing poppy fields in Afghanistan. And who's this number one poppy demand but America, Purdue Pharma? And you said you have a son in the military. So what do you feel about having a kid in the military when we get sent to Syria to bomb places that we shouldn't even be in? We get sent to Afghanistan to protect poppy fields that are illegal, that are, just serving, again, a corporate interest because there's money being kicked back to the government. What do you, literally, you got a kid that's putting his life on the line for that kind of shit.
Absolutely. And my kid's been deployed. If we're going to get into this, you're going to have to give me something with sugar in it, because I'm going to tip over if I don't put something in my mouth. And
Do we need a break?
Well, if that's mechanically possible, in a few minutes, let me say this because I don't want to lose my thought. But more close to my heart, honestly, because Oliver was deployed to Romania, which was considered a combat zone when he was there. And I was nervous, but not like if he had been in Afghanistan or in Iraq. I have a nephew who joined the military in June of 2001 to go to college. For 3 years, he joined the Army for 3 years. And 6 years later, he was released He was stop-lossed. He spent 6 years in Afghanistan. And he's a completely different human being. And I changed this kid's diapers. And, I believe that a government has to retain the right to prosecute war. It is the function of government. It's a government's ability to govern, and ultimate power lies in its ability to prosecute war. I'm not anti-military. I'm against the industrial war complex. I'm against all the black spending. And what I'm mostly against is, obviously I don't believe that what happened on 9/11 was what we were told.
No.
And I don't believe that we should ever have gone to Iraq. Obviously none of us know enough about what happened in Afghanistan and how much Osama bin Laden had to do with 9/11. Maybe he did have something to do with it. I don't really know.
We're just being lied to with everything.
Well, we are being lied to. What I do believe about the military is that if you are going to spill one drop of American blood, then you have to be willing to commit and go all the way. Because I know more about what happened in Afghanistan than I want to know, because there was a book written about the unit that my nephew was in, and I got the book and I read the book, and it was written by a guy who was in combat and who was there. He was my nephew's commanding officer, and it's very upsetting, the politics of war in a war theater, where these boys, go out in the wilderness and they're trying to, they're doing what they're told, which they're being lied to too.
Right.
And they go out in the wilderness, and these people are terrified. People who are just trying to feed themselves are terrified of these two armed groups, and they're just, like getting hammered between them. I mean, who wants to get in the way of the United States military? And then there's this other group who is willing to do what, they're fighting. And every time that they go over the Pakistani border and shoot back, we can't finish anything. It's a very, very upsetting situation for all of those people who served. I support all of our men and women who are in uniform, because I don't think, maybe the Joint Chiefs have some accountability, but largely military is a system based on following orders. Like this whole ridiculous thing, I'll just use this as an example. Did you hear about this guy who was in the United States? He got out of Germany in 1945. He was a prison guard in Dachau or some fucking place. So now he's 87 years old. He's in Cleveland or something. They drag him back to Europe and they put him on trial for war crimes. Fucking dude. He was a 18-year-old kid who had 6 levels of command above him, or 12 before you get to Hitler. And Hitler said, put him in ovens and burn them. And so someone said, listen, you better put coal in the oven, or you better put Zyklon B in that. He was following orders. Now, I'm not saying what the guy did was right any more than the guys who made those kids in Afghanistan run around naked, and you know what I mean? But they were following orders. The accountability is way up the line.
And they're just scared, and they're kids.
Well, and military is a system that creates people who are supposed to follow orders. Their whole function is to do what they're told
like dogs.
By their government. Well, I'm not saying that there's not a place for that. What I'm saying is that we live in this society where everybody's like, well, we want to get over on these guys 55 years later. This guy's living in Cleveland. He's an old man. He's 90 years old. They drag him back to Europe. They put him, it's a dog and pony show. It's insane. And it's one more thing where, now I'm not saying what he did was right. The Holocaust was hideous, but it wasn't his fault. it was Hitler's fault. It was really whose fault it was is, the Treaty of Versailles created an environment where the German people could not even get off their knees after World War I. That manufactured World War II. Everybody who knows history knows it. World War II was, 75 million people died between the time they killed the Archduke, which was what started World War I, and the end of World War II. 75 million people were murdered. And it was all about, controlling populations.
Right. So it's 75 million of the best and brightest of the world at the time, in the First World at least, that were involved in that war, were killed. And yet the people who started it, I mean, I know Hitler killed himself, but like the accountability doesn't really come back to, well, okay, thanks, Sarah. But the accountability doesn't really come back to the highest up chain of commands. You don't have people at the Pentagon being put on trial for war crimes when they go and
waterboard
and
somebody.
They start in, and they start wars in other countries. They support wars on one side, and then that side gets too big, and then we have to go back and fight the side that we supported 5 years ago.
25 years.
Or
right.
Well, it's
in
back and forth for 25.
We did the same thing.
Yeah,
we supported Osama bin Laden in the 80s against the Soviet Union. And then,
right. So who actually loses in this process is the soldiers who accept commands. Just like those psychology experiments where they were like, you need to hit that button and, buzz the other person with electricity. People get told, and at some point they accept the order. So the soldiers who aren't fucking paid enough to put their lives on the line, especially for people who are maniacs, control freaks, trying to go in and get into countries that they shouldn't be, right?
So
they're the
Do
ones.
away with the military? I mean, every time we have a discussion like this, I'm like, well, then what's the solution? Do you do away with the military? How much of the population is getting a check from the military? Do you want all those people in the workforce?
Or use the military for what it is
so they wouldn't get a check anymore?
Well, if they weren't in the military, they wouldn't. If you do away with, I'm saying, what's the answer to a problem like that? I know the military is not perfect. I know that what happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Nicaragua and fill in the blank going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, you can bet that bad stuff happened around the military and that money was an issue.
The answer would be more free access to education and jobs that use that, maybe more on the creative side, so that a brilliant kid like your son could not only take his brilliance but also put it to work producing instead of being part of an industrial complex. He's getting a master's anyway, so you get it outside of the military. And the thing is, if you have too educated a workforce that has more access to jobs that don't include like losing their life to also learn about nuclear engineering, right? Like my friend who went to the Navy. Give me a sec, Mike. If you actually had that, then you wouldn't have as many people going into the military. So it behooves the government to keep a less educated population that has a scarcity of jobs, a scarcity of opportunity, and I know a lot of people in the military, and they saw it as their best option, as a way out. And so if you have a situation that they need a way out from, then you'll have people continue to go and be the soldiers, who are ultimately the ones that are bearing the burden of our government's poor choices.
The Outer Fringe was recorded at Triii-Point Studios. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved. Statements and opinions made on the show do not necessarily reflect the views or beliefs of Triii-Point Studios or its members.